Agatha Raisin and the Poisoned Wedding Cake. Revisited, a dead wedding planner, a ruined cake, and a village full of gossip. Agatha Raisin must clear her name before the rumours bake themselves solid. Where in the world are you listening from tonight? And subscribe so you never miss upcoming mysteries. Carsely woke beneath a crisp spring sunlight that pretended warmth yet left the ankles cold. The hedgerows glittered with a touch of dew, and the village green spread itself in a smug sort of brightness, as if determined to look cheerful whether anyone approved or not. Agatha Raisin, however, was not in the approving mood. She strode across the grass in a pastel jacket purchased during a moment of reckless optimism in Evesham. The colour, she hoped, suggested fresh and youthful, though she feared it drifted closer to a woman making an effort. Today was the rehearsal fete for the upcoming Carsely Spring Wedding Showcase, the village's latest excuse to gather, gossip, and consume cake under banners painted by people who claim to enjoy that sort of thing. Doris Simpson had already declared it more important than the Royal Variety performance, which, in typical Carsely fashion, was accepted as unchallenged truth. The WI Hall had been transformed into an arena of lace-trimmed ambition. Stalls displayed ribbons, favours, floral mock-ups, and what someone claimed was a symbolic dove release, but looked suspiciously like an agitated basket. Agatha carried her wedding cake with both hands, the box heavier than expected. She had commissioned the cake from a proper bakery in Evesham, having neither the patience nor the interest to bake one herself. If anyone dared ask, she planned to imply she had crafted it late into the night, sleeves rolled up, flour smudged across her noble brow. She was still polishing the story in her mind when Mrs. Blocksby approached with her serene, gentle smile. "My dear, I never knew you baked," Mrs. Blocksby said, peering at the box in a way that felt far too perceptive. Agatha bristled. "I can turn my hand to anything when required," she replied, lifting her chin. Before Mrs. Blocksby could pursue this dangerous line of inquiry, Letitia Hardwick swept in with the majesty of a ship under full sail. Letitia was Carsely's reigning queen of competitive baking, a status she protected with the ferocity of a territorial swan. Her creation towered above the others, a monstrous 5-tier wedding cake decorated with delicate sugar roses and a smugness so potent it might have qualified as a controlled substance. "Oh, Agatha," Letitia said sweetly, "how brave of you to attempt a cake this year. We must all try new things, mustn't we?" Agatha resisted the urge to batter her with the nearest tear. "Lovely to see you, Letitia," she said, managing only a small snarl at the edge of her smile. At the centre of the hall hovered Maurice Pendlebury, self-appointed emperor of the Carsely Spring Wedding Showcase. A wedding planner by profession, Maurice had cultivated an air of theatrical refinement that required constant upkeep and copious hairspray. He strutted between tables inspecting offerings, muttering to himself, flicking crumbs from surfaces that held none, and judging nearly everything as though it had personally offended him. "No, no, this will not do," he lamented near the floral arrangements. "Roses, roses, roses. Does no one understand restraint?" He moved to the cakes. "Ah," he sighed dramatically, "the confectionery arts, the purest revelation of taste, or in some unfortunate cases," he paused before Agatha's modest 2-tier effort, "the absence of it." Agatha's cheeks flushed a dangerous shade. "There is nothing wrong with my cake," she snapped. "It's elegant," Maurice sniffed. "It's beige. It's classic. It's timid." Agatha opened her mouth to deliver a robust critique of Maurice's personality when Mrs. Blocksby touched her elbow gently. "Perhaps," she murmured, "this isn't worth it." Agatha disagreed entirely but allowed herself to be steered toward the tea urn. A cup of weak, over-stewed tea did nothing for her temper. From across the hall she watched Maurice select a slice of Letitia's enormous masterpiece. He raised it with theatrical flair, as though conducting an orchestra. "Now this," he declared, "is a wedding cake worthy of—" He didn't finish. His face tightened, his breath caught, and with alarming suddenness he toppled forward, collapsing like a felled tree straight into Agatha's cake. A splash of icing shot across her jacket. The hall erupted in shrieks, gasps, and a triumphant, "Oh my heavens!" from Doris Simpson. Someone shouted for an ambulance. Someone else shouted for smelling salts. Maurice lay motionless, his face buried in what had once been Agatha's elegant facade. A faint chemical tang hung in the air, not enough to choke, yet present enough to signal something distinctly wrong. Agatha stared at the ruin of her cake, then at Maurice's limp form and snapped, That man's been poisoned. Several villagers gaped at her. One helpful soul muttered, "Poisoned by her cake, no doubt." "My cake is perfectly safe," Agatha barked. Well, it was until he shoved his face into it. She stepped back, wiping icing from her sleeve with the dignity of a woman forced into indignity far too often. Bill Wong arrived moments later, calm as ever, notebook tucked under his arm. "All right, everyone," he said. "Let's keep some space, please." Agatha seized him by the sleeve. "Bill, tell them my cake didn't kill him." Bill examined the scene. "Agatha, I can't tell them anything until we know what happened." "But it wasn't my cake," she insisted. "You must tell them that." "We don't know that yet." "Bill!" He gave her a patient look he saved especially for her. "Just give me a moment to breathe." Agatha stood stiffly at the edge of the room as the paramedics carried Maurice away. Her cake, smashed and sagging, looked accusatory. Letitia hovered close by, torn between horror and the satisfaction of knowing that, even in disaster, her own cake remained unblemished. "Terrible business," Letitia said, placing a hand to her chest. "One must take food safety seriously. Some do treat cake as mere decoration." Agatha snarled. "If you imply one more time that I poisoned him, I'll staple your rosary of sugar roses to your forehead." Letitia retreated, dignity wobbling. As the crowd dispersed, whispers swirled through the WI hall like mid-afternoon drizzle. Agatha could hear her own name in every muttered sentence. Agatha's cake. Something she brought in. Never known her to bake. These London types. By the time evening rolled over Carsely, rumours had grown arms, legs, and small embroidered waistcoats. In the Red Lion pub, someone confidently claimed Agatha had argued with Maurice earlier. She hadn't. Outside the village shop, two pensioners speculated she'd purchased funny ingredients from Evesham. At the vicarage, Mrs. Bloxby quietly reassured several nervous brides that Agatha was unlikely to be responsible. Agatha, sitting at home with Hodge stretched insolently across her clean laundry, fumed. She lit a cigarette, just one, to steady her thinking, and blew out a tight stream of smoke. She refused to accept humiliation. She would get to the bottom of this. She would prove her innocence, and she would ensure every villager who whispered otherwise regretted doing so. She jabbed out the cigarette, stood, and said aloud, "If that man died tasting Letitia Hardwick's cake, I'll find out exactly why, and I'll find out before anyone else pins this wretched mess on me." Hodge yawned without interest. Agatha narrowed her eyes. "Don't look at me like that. I'm perfectly capable of solving a simple poisoning." But beneath her bravado lay a familiar hollow ache, the feeling that, once again, she stood half inside and half outside village approval. It spurred her more effectively than any sense of justice. Tomorrow, she decided, Carsely would learn the truth. Tonight, however, she needed a change of jacket. Morning drizzle drifted over Carsely like a half-hearted apology. Not enough to justify an umbrella, yet just enough to flatten Agatha Raisin's hair, which she considered a personal attack. The village green looked damp and sullen, and the bunting from yesterday's disaster hung limply, as though embarrassed to be associated with the affair. Agatha watched it from her kitchen window, while Hodge sprawled across her clean laundry with the smug satisfaction of a creature who knew he would never be moved unless he wished it. "Useless animal," Agatha muttered, though she envied his serenity. Her reputation, meanwhile, was being mauled in every corner of Carsely. She'd made the mistake of passing the Red Lion earlier. Through the steamed window she spotted two regulars deep in discussion, their gestures suspiciously cake-related. She had pivoted so sharply she nearly sprained something. Better to stay home than endure the knowing looks and the half-whispered, "Well, you never know with her." She had just started reorganizing her alibi. She hadn't done anything, of course, but the village appeared to demand narratives, when a firm knock sounded. Bill Wong stood on her doorstep, wearing that expression of calm patience that made her want to both thank him and throttle him. "Morning, Agatha," he said. "Thought I'd give you an early update. Please say you're here to tell me Maurice died of natural causes brought on by excessive pomposity." Bill gave a tired smile. "Not exactly. He died in hospital just after midnight. Due to Maurice's death, the spring wedding showcase was officially postponed until further notice. But I can tell you the poison wasn't in your cake." Agatha straightened. "Well, of course it wasn't. My cake was perfectly harmless." "The problem," Bill continued, stepping inside, "is that the scene looked as though your cake was the culprit. People assume what they see." People assume nonsense, Agatha snapped, and besides, Maurice didn't even taste my cake. Yes, but he fell into it. That's enough for some. Agatha deflated slightly, lowering herself into a kitchen chair. The drizzle tapped lightly at the window in a maddening rhythm. Hodge stretched and turned his back on both of them. So, what was poisoned? She asked. Bill opened his notebook. Something Maurice sampled just before he collapsed. A decorative ingredient, according to initial analysis. Rare, not easy to get, not part of your cake. Agatha perked up. Which means someone deliberately gave him something tainted. That's the working theory. She leaned closer. Who? Bill hesitated. That's the trouble. Maurice had a talent for getting under people's skin. Half the showcase vendors complained about him the past month. Name them, Agatha said, in a tone that suggested she was preparing to march out the door. Bill counted on his fingers. Letitia Hardwick, obviously. Eloise Carter, the shy bride. Colin Gresley, the florist. Jocelyn Vane, his assistant. And that's only the confirmed conflicts. Agatha sniffed. Letitia is capable of murder by baking alone. If the poison doesn't kill you, the smugness will. Bill ignored this. Eloise had a breakdown after Maurice publicly criticized her design choices. Colin's been chasing him for unpaid invoices. And Jocelyn, well, Maurice treated her like staff, not a colleague. You treat staff better, Agatha said pointedly. Bill blinked. I don't have staff. Exactly. Before he could argue, the kettle began rattling on the hob. Agatha rose to make tea, but her mind was already buzzing. Letitia, Eloise, Colin, Jocelyn. A colourful bouquet of motives, each riper than the last. She imagined their expressions yesterday. Letitia's stiff smile, Eloise's trembling hands, Colin's anxious glance, Jocelyn's forced politeness. All simmering beneath the sugary decorations and village niceties. She handed Bill a mug. I suppose you think I should stay out of it. It would help, he said, knowing full well she wouldn't. Well, I shan't. My name is being dragged through the mud, Bill. Mud I didn't even step in. Bill stood to leave. Just tread carefully, Agatha. Carefully, she repeated, which in her lexicon translated loosely to, with maximum interference. The drizzle began to fade as he walked down the path. A hesitant sun pushed through the clouds. Agatha regarded it as a sign, perhaps divine, perhaps mere weather, that she ought to begin her unofficial investigation immediately. She fixed her hair, changed her jacket, and headed out. The village lanes gleamed in the new brightness, early blossoms dripping gently from hedges. The W.I. Hall stood quiet, its bunting drying in the timid sunlight. Somewhere in the distance a lawnmower spluttered in protest. Agatha's feet took her inevitably toward trouble, Letitia Hardwick's cottage on Lavender Rise. The path was lined with neatly trimmed shrubs, the sort Letitia boasted about maintaining without assistance. Agatha rang the bell once, then twice. Letitia opened the door a crack, as if expecting a tax collector. What do you want, Agatha? She asked sharply. I came to talk, Agatha said, attempting a tone of cool authority. Important matter. Well, it's not a good time. It never is, Agatha replied, pushing lightly at the door. But Letitia blocked her. No, I can't. I'm busy. Behind her, distinctly audible, came the sharp slam of a cupboard door. Letitia winced. Agatha's eyebrows shot up. Busy, she repeated dryly. Doing what? Trapping gremlins? Letitia went pink. It's none of your business. A man died yesterday, Agatha pressed. A man who sampled your cake. He sampled the replacement cake, Letitia corrected, flustered. The original one collapsed. Yes, you mentioned that, Agatha said, though she still suspected the story had been revised to preserve Letitia's dignity. Mind if I come in? I do mind. Letitia attempted to close the door, but Agatha wedged her foot forward. Letitia's expression turned faintly murderous, though not enough to constitute real danger. Agatha stepped back at last. Fine, but I'll be asking questions around the village, and the thing about questions is they usually lead somewhere. Letitia narrowed her eyes. Are you threatening me? Me? Never, Agatha said, voice sweet as vinegar. But your cupboard seems nervous. She turned on her heel and marched away before Letitia could reply. The sun was higher now, glowing behind the clouds. A bright, determined light, the sort that made Agatha feel she ought to be moving, probing, discovering, not lingering on thresholds. She headed toward the vicarage next, telling herself she needed spiritual clarity, though the real reason was that Mrs. Blocksby had an uncanny knack for calming her enough to think logically. The vicarage garden looked content in the mild sunshine, daffodils nodding politely. Mrs. Blocksby opened the door even before Agatha reached it. "I saw you coming," she said warmly. "You look troubled." "The entire village thinks I poisoned Maurice," Agatha announced, stomping into the sitting room. "And Letitia Hardwicke has something to hide." "Does she?" Mrs. Blocksby asked, settling beside her with a gentle curiosity. Agatha launched into a detailed account of the slamming cupboard. Mrs. Blocksby listened patiently, nodding. "It could be harmless," she said, "but it could be important. People act oddly when frightened." "Letitia frightened?" Agatha scoffed. "She frightens other people." Mrs. Blocksby offered tea, which Agatha accepted, partly because tea made her feel steadier, and partly because refusing it would seem dramatic even for her. As they sipped, the vicar's wife mentioned something interesting. She had recently seen Maurice in Evesham with a young woman who didn't look like any of the local brides. "She seemed distressed," Mrs. Blocksby added. "Maurice was speaking sharply to her." "Another unhappy client," Agatha said, though the thought prickled her curiosity. She left the vicarage with her spirits lifted, the weather finally matching her mood. Carsely looked brighter, though the gossip would undoubtedly thicken by lunchtime. Agatha quickened her pace, determined, formidable, and buoyed by a familiar surge of investigative purpose. She was nearing her cottage when she glanced back toward Lavender Rise and thought she saw a curtain twitch. Letitia? Or someone else hiding behind lace? Either way, Agatha Raisin wasn't going away. She would clear her name, expose a killer, and restore her standing, preferably before anyone thought to start another rumour. The next morning brought a pale, hesitant sunshine that filtered softly through Carsely like a visitor afraid of intruding. It brightened the cottages without warming them, and gave the hedgerows a faint sparkle that would be gone by noon. Agatha Raisin emerged from her cottage with the determined gait of a woman who had slept badly, dreamed worse, and woken ready to interrogate anyone who crossed her path. Hodge watched her leave from the windowsill, tail swishing with judgment. He believed breakfast should have been served earlier. Agatha ignored him. Her reputation needed feeding first. Letitia Hardwicke's cottage sat prettily on Lavender Rise, its garden so tidy it bordered on oppressive. The sugar roses on Letitia's prize-winning cakes always seemed to have a whiff of this place about them, perfectly arranged, perfectly posed, and perfectly false. Agatha rang the bell with the authority of a tax audit. Letitia opened the door wearing a starched apron and a defensive frown. "Agatha," she said flatly. "Really? Must this continue?" "Yes," Agatha replied, stepping forward just enough to make Letitia retreat half an inch. "I want a word." Letitia blocked the doorway. "I'm busy." "Doing what? Threatening more cakes into submission?" Letitia's eyes narrowed, but she reluctantly allowed Agatha inside. The kitchen gleamed in a way that suggested daily polishing and suppressed anxiety. A faint scent of vanilla hung in the air. What caught Agatha's eye, however, was the scorch mark on the far counter, a dark, peculiar patch that didn't match the rest of the spotless room. "What's that?" Agatha asked, pointing. Letitia stiffened. "A mishap. I used a blowtorch for creme brulee." Agatha eyed the mark again. "Funny, I don't see any sign you've made creme brulee recently." "Well, I cleaned up." "Not that thoroughly," Agatha said, leaning closer. Letitia pressed a hand over the spot. "It's nothing, Agatha. Do stop fussing." Agatha straightened. "You said yesterday that your original wedding cake collapsed. I thought your cakes were infallible." "Every artist has their tragedies," Letitia replied curtly, "and I'd been up all night crafting the replacement. Very stressful." Agatha folded her arms. "Except you told someone else that the original collapsed at dawn, not in the night. Odd how these stories shift." Letitia flushed. "I don't have to explain myself to you." "No," Agatha said, "but you may have to explain yourself to Bill Wong. Did Maurice taste the replacement cake before the showcase?" "Of course he did," Letitia snapped. "He demanded a preview, criticized the roses naturally, said they were overly emotional." Agatha almost smiled. Maurice had a knack for infuriating people simply by describing their work. "Did he eat much of it?" "A sliver, just enough to wound me." Her voice wobbled slightly. "Not guilt, but humiliation. Agatha knew the sound well. Before Agatha could press further, a cupboard door banged sharply behind them. Letitia jumped. Agatha pounced. "Who's that?" "No one," Letitia said far too quickly. "Honestly, Agatha, your imagination—" Agatha strode forward, but Letitia darted in front of her. "It was the cat. My neighbour's cat. It sneaks in sometimes." "A cat capable of closing cupboards?" Agatha asked dryly. "A very clever cat," Letitia muttered. Agatha held her gaze for several long seconds, then stepped back. Letitia wasn't a murderer, probably, but she was definitely hiding something, and the scorch mark gnawed at Agatha's curiosity like a mouse with ambition. She left the cottage with a sharp, "We'll talk again," and marched toward the vicarage in need of clearer air and gentler company. The lane glistened in the thin sunlight, mud shining in patches where yesterday's drizzle had lingered. Birds sang with determined cheerfulness, as if insisting Carsely behave like a proper village. Mrs. Bloxby opened the door before Agatha even knocked. "You look troubled," she said kindly. "Troubled? I'm being slandered by half the village and stonewalled by a woman who thinks buttercream is a philosophy. Of course I'm troubled." Mrs. Bloxby ushered her inside for tea. The sitting room smelled of warm carpet and lemon polish, a comforting antidote to Letitia's disinfected kitchen. Agatha collapsed onto the sofa with the air of a woman who wished to extinguish the world with sheer irritation. "Letitia is hiding something," Agatha began. "There's a scorch mark on her counter that wasn't from any creme brulee she's actually made, and she has a cupboard that slams of its own accord." "Perhaps she's embarrassed," Mrs. Bloxby said gently. "Letitia has a fierce pride in her work. Failure can make people behave oddly." "Failure can make people murderous," Agatha retorted, "especially when their cakes are criticised by men like Maurice." Mrs. Bloxby poured the tea. Agatha felt her shoulders loosen a fraction. Tea did that, draping a warm layer over her frayed nerves. "Maurice was seen in Evesham a few days ago," Mrs. Bloxby said, "with a young woman who looked terribly distressed, not one of the local brides." Agatha sat forward. "Distressed how?" "Tearful. Agitated. Maurice seemed to be arguing with her." Agatha's mind whirred. Maurice with a mystery woman, Letitia with a scorched counter, a cupboard that slammed in fear, or guilt, Eloise Carter trembling at the fate, Colin Gresley with his unpaid invoices, Jocelyn Vane treated like a servant, a full cast of motives, some petty, some poignant. "Maurice collected enemies like other men collect cufflinks," Agatha murmured, "though at least cufflinks don't poison you." Mrs. Bloxby gave a mild, amused smile. "Just take care, Agatha. You have a way of stirring things." "Things need stirring," Agatha said. "Otherwise they settle, and when things settle, people gossip." She left the vicarage feeling steadier and marched back through Carsely with renewed purpose. The sun had strengthened, giving the village a brief glow. Doris Simpson stood outside the shop, clutching her shopping bag and brimming with the latest scandal. "Terrible business," Doris said. "Between you and me, Agatha, some are saying Maurice might have eaten something dreadful here in Carsely. Imagine." "He did," Agatha said crisply. "Letitia's cake." Doris gasped. "Oh, I knew it. I always said too much ambition in baking leads to trouble. That woman uses too many foreign ingredients. Mark my words." Agatha pressed for details, but Doris only offered speculation garnished with rumour. Still, the exchange was useful. Doris's certainty that Letitia was guilty meant at least 3 others already believed the opposite. Gossip in Carsely always split itself into factions, like a village parliament, but with pastry. Back home, Hodge had moved from the laundry to the armchair, shedding enough fur to carpet a small hall. Agatha sat opposite him, tapping her fingers on the table. "Letitia's hiding something," she said aloud, "and I'll find out what before Bill starts fussing." Hodge yawned. "Don't be sarcastic," Agatha muttered. She lit a single cigarette, just one, and watched the smoke curl upward in a thin ribbon. Outside, the sun gleamed stronger, dispersing the last traces of drizzle. The day had brightened, and so had her resolve. Letitia's cupboard had slammed. Someone had been inside, someone who didn't want to be seen, and Maurice had been poisoned by something he sampled before falling into her cake. Agatha stubbed out the cigarette. "Competitiveness and poison," she murmured. "They often walk hand in hand." She stood, shoulders squared. Carsely had cast its suspicious eyes on her, and she intended to redirect them, with precision, Tomorrow, she would dig deeper. Tonight, however, she would reclaim her armchair from Hodge. He didn't budge. Agatha sighed. Fine, you win this round. The following morning arrived bright and crisp, the kind of sharp Cotswold blue that dared the village to complain. Agatha Raisin stood on her doorstep blinking against the sunlight when she spotted something unusual on her mat, a cream envelope neatly sealed with her name written in elegant cursive. Not posted, hand-delivered. Her pulse jumped. Hand-delivered letters from thoughtful men were rare. Hand-delivered threats were far more her style. She tore it open. Inside lay a single sheet of thick paper bearing a short, vicious message. Stop meddling. Maurice was warned. You will be too. No signature. No explanation. Just menace wrapped in calligraphy. Oh, marvellous, Agatha muttered. A mystery with stationery. She marched inside, grabbed her handbag, and stormed through Carsely toward Bill Wong. The village basked in early sunshine. Washing flapped optimistically on lines. Children chalked on pavements, and the W.I. Hall stood deserted, pretending innocence. Agatha ignored all of it and hammered on Bill's door. Bill answered with the weary expression of a man who suspected his breakfast would be delayed. Morning, Agatha. She thrust the letter at him. Look at this. He scanned it and frowned. This was hand-delivered. Unless the Royal Mail has started offering menacing overnight, yes. Bill gestured her inside. It could be connected to Maurice, or unrelated. These small villages can produce dramatic reactions. Not this dramatic, Agatha snapped, and don't you dare suggest I've imagined it. I'm not, Bill said, setting the letter down carefully, but this doesn't confirm anything except someone wanted to frighten you. Agatha crossed her arms. Good luck. I frighten others, not the reverse. Bill almost smiled. You should tell me if you receive anything else. I certainly will, after I investigate it myself. He sighed, but didn't argue. Initial forensics suggest Maurice sampled something decorative shortly before he collapsed. A rare ingredient. Could have been brought by any vendor. Agatha leaned forward. Rare how? Not something you buy at the village shop, Bill replied. More like specialized baking samples. Letitia, Agatha declared, or someone trying to frame her. Possibly, Bill said. Just be cautious. Caution, Agatha thought, was for people with dull reputations. She left Bill's house determined to cover the village faster than gossip. As she reached the shop, a cloud of perfume and London energy approached. Roy Silver, teetering slightly on impractically stylish shoes. Aggie, he cried, throwing open his arms. What a tragic weekend. Word reached London that you've poisoned somebody again. I didn't poison anyone, Agatha snapped. Of course not, Roy said breezily, but it makes excellent gossip. I simply had to come. He linked arms with her and marched her toward the road. We're going to investigate. It'll be marvellous. I'll take notes. I've always wanted to be filmed saying, I knew her before she was infamous. Agatha shook him off, but secretly welcomed the company. Fine, we're going to speak to Eloise Carter. The trembling bride? Roy asked. Divine. Lead on, Sherlockina. They walked to a modest cottage on Beach Lane. The spring sunshine warmed the brickwork, and a faint scent of hyacinths drifted from the garden. Eloise opened the door with wide, anxious eyes. She looked as fragile as spun sugar. Oh, she whispered, staring at Agatha as though expecting handcuffs. Are you here about Maurice? Partly, Agatha said, softening her tone. May we come in? Eloise glanced over her shoulder before nodding. Her fiancé, Andrew, sat stiffly in the armchair, jaw clenched. He watched Agatha as if she were a crow perched on his wedding cake. We're devastated about Maurice, Eloise said, twisting her hands. He was helping us with the showcase. Helping, Agatha echoed. He criticised your designs in front of everyone. Eloise flushed. Andrew spoke for her. Maurice was passionate. He had high standards. Roy raised an eyebrow. If he'd had higher standards, he might still be alive. Eloise flinched. Andrew glared at Roy. Agatha stepped in before hair gel and tempers collided. Did Maurice ever threaten you? She asked Eloise. Say anything. Unkind. Eloise hesitated. Andrew's grip tightened on the armrest. We don't need to answer these questions, he said. Roy leaned forward. Oh, but you do. Otherwise, Aggie will form theories, and trust me, those are hazardous. Agatha ignored him. Something frightened more. A loud crash sounded from the kitchen. Eloise jumped. Andrew shot to his feet. "Just the cat," he said quickly. Agatha's eyes narrowed. "Does every guilty household in this village own an unusually clumsy cat?" Andrew blocked the doorway. "We're done here." Eloise, pale and shaking, whispered, "Please, we've told you everything." Agatha studied her carefully. The girl looked distressed but not murderous. The fiancé, however, had the defensive posture of a man hiding more than crockery. She and Roy stepped outside into a burst of clean sunlight. Roy exhaled dramatically. "Well, he's hiding something." "Anyone with eyes could see that," Agatha replied, "but I don't think Eloise poisoned Maurice. She can barely butter bread without trembling." Roy nodded. "Then who sent that letter?" "Someone who wants me off the scent," Agatha muttered, "or someone who thinks I know more than I do." She frowned. "Which is ridiculous. I know very little at this stage. Infuriating." They walked back toward Carsely. The sunshine strengthened, lending the lanes a sharp golden glow. Even the village hedges seemed to stand taller. Agatha found her spirits lifting with the warmth. She reached her cottage door only to feel them drop again. The front hall looked slightly off. Nothing dramatic, just an impression. A coat hanger nudged. A shoe not quite where she'd left it. "Someone's been in here," Agatha said quietly. "How exciting," Roy whispered. Agatha ignored him and checked her handbag. The threatening letter, which she had shoved inside earlier, was gone. "Damn it," she snapped. "Someone stole the letter from inside my home." "Whoever wrote it wanted me rattled enough to back off, not dead. At least not yet," Roy gasped. "Aggie, an admirer." "An enemy," Agatha corrected. "And enemies don't tidy up after themselves." She scanned the hall. Something glittered faintly by the doorframe. A tiny fleck of metallic blue dust, so small it could have been overlooked entirely. Agatha crouched, scooped it onto her fingertip, and held it to the light. "Food dye," she murmured. "The same shade Letitia used on her replacement cake." Roy leaned in. "Are you saying Letitia broke into your cottage?" "I don't know," Agatha murmured, "but someone wanted that letter." She straightened and swept the glittering fleck into an envelope. "And I intend to find out who." Outside, the sunlight brightened into dazzling clarity. The village looked picture perfect, but beneath the calm surface, someone was already shaping their next move. Agatha locked her door. "This isn't just poison and petty rivalries," she said. "Someone is orchestrating things." Roy nudged her. "Shall we follow the trail, darling?" Agatha's lips curled into a determined smile. "We shall." The next morning arrived with a pale, workable sunshine, the sort that made Carsely look honest again. The hedgerows glistened faintly, and the lanes, though muddy, carried the pleasant smell of damp earth rather than disaster. Agatha set off toward Mercester with a brisk stride and a mood sharpened enough to slice fondant. She intended to speak to Colin Gresley, florist, debtor, and one of Maurice Pendlebury's many reluctant admirers. Roy Silver trotted beside her, already overdressed for a simple village outing. His scarf fluttered dramatically in the mild breeze. "A florist, Aggie! How delicious! Perfume, petals, and potential poison." "Colin is harmless," Agatha said, "but harmless men become desperate when pushed." Roy nodded. "So do harmless women. Present company excluded, naturally." Agatha ignored the jab. Mercester's high street hummed quietly in the morning light. Shops opened shutters, a baker swept crumbs onto the pavement, a bus wheezed to a halt. They reached Gresley's Florals, a tidy storefront with delicate script on the window, and a display of lilies that looked mournful enough to be prophetic. Inside, Colin Gresley stood among buckets of flowers, his glasses sliding perilously down his nose. He jumped when Agatha entered, knocking over a small pot of irises. "Oh, Mrs. Raisin," he squeaked, scrambling to right them. "I wasn't expecting—" "A murder investigation?" Roy supplied grandly. "No one ever is." Colin went pale. "Oh dear. Oh heavens." Agatha stepped forward. "Relax, Colin. I'm only here for answers, and perhaps to clear my name, which has been thoroughly soiled by village gossip." "Terrible business," he murmured, wiping his hands on his apron. "Maurice's death, I mean. And the rumours, dreadful." "Rumours exaggerate," Agatha said briskly, "but invoices don't." Colin winced. "You found them?" "You left them sitting on the counter for anyone to see," Agatha replied, nodding toward a stack of papers held down by a ceramic frog. "Final notice. Late payment. Several of them." Maurice said he'd pay me after the showcase. Colin swallowed. He always said that. People who say that rarely do, Roy murmured. Agatha leaned in. Did you ever threaten him? Colin's eyes widened. Heavens no. I sent a strongly worded letter, yes, but I would never— What letter? Agatha asked. He fetched a drawer. Inside sat several envelopes, orders, receipts, and one crumpled draft. Agatha unfolded it. The handwriting was messy and anxious. Pay up, or else something will have to be done. Colin, Agatha said, this is hardly elegant, or frightening, or legible. Exactly, he squeaked. I'm not a threatening person, I simply needed my money. Roy patted him sympathetically. Darling, you couldn't intimidate a daisy. Agatha scanned the counter again and spotted a tiny jar next to the till. It bore a handwritten label, Prussian blue, not edible. The powder inside shimmered faintly under the shop lights, metallic, cold, distinctively vivid. What's this? She asked. Colin blushed. Food-safe colour palettes sometimes use visual samples. Bakers rent them to match shades. It's for ornamental petals only, not for eating. It stains terribly. Agatha picked it up. Did Letitia borrow this recently? She did, Colin said. Only for a day. Said she needed it for the replacement cake. Agatha's heartbeat quickened. The fleck she had found on her doormat yesterday had been exactly this colour. And you're certain she returned it? Yes, Colin said, fluttering nervously. Right after the showcase. Roy leaned toward Agatha. A link to your house, Aggie? How provocative. Agatha kept her tone even. Colin, did you give this to anyone else? No, well, he hesitated. Maurice borrowed colour samples too, strictly visual, nothing edible. Agatha and Roy exchanged a look. Maurice, Letitia, Colin, a triangle of decorative dyes and mounting tensions. Agatha set the jar down. Colin, did Maurice threaten you? Colin sighed. Sometimes. Mostly about payment. He also said my arrangements were funeral chic, which hurt. Everything chic hurts someone, Roy said with a theatrical shrug. Agatha changed tack. Did you notice anything odd the morning of the showcase? Colin thought. Jocelyn Vane was there early. She seemed tense. She knocked over a box of ribbons and nearly cried. Another thread. Agatha tucked it away. She thanked Colin, who seemed relieved to see them go, though still bewildered by the intrusion. As they stepped outside, the sun brightened, throwing golden streaks across the pavement. Roy inhaled deeply. Honestly, Aggie, this village, scandal, heartbreak, artistic ambition, we should bottle it. We'd never find enough customers, Agatha muttered. They walked back toward Carsely. Roy suggested they stop in Evesham for cocktails, for investigative morale, but Agatha declined. She was in no mood to be distracted by Roy's idea of liquid enlightenment. Back in Carsely, the village hummed with low-level chatter. The drizzle had vanished, replaced by crisp edges of sunlight on the green. Doris Simpson hovered outside the shop, intercepting passers-by like a toll-keeper gathering news instead of coins. "Any updates, Agatha?" Doris asked, bright-eyed. "Not yet," Agatha said, "but I'm working on it." "Everyone is talking," Doris whispered, leaning closer. Someone overheard that Maurice threatened to expose a scandal. Something about a bigamous past. Imagine! Agatha blinked. Bigamy? Well, I don't know, Doris admitted, but it sounds marvellously dramatic. Dangerously dramatic, Agatha corrected. She dismissed Doris with a brisk nod and hurried home. Inside her cottage, the air felt still and tidy. Hodge, sprawled on the sofa now, watched her with the aloofness of a creature who interpreted murder investigations as mild inconveniences to his nap schedule. Colin's terrified, Agatha told him, and Letitia's defensive. Eloise can barely speak. And Jocelyn, she frowned. Something's off there. Hodge blinked slowly, unimpressed. Fine, she sighed, sitting opposite him. But someone is lying, and someone has been in my house. A gust of wind rattled the window slightly. An innocent sound that still set Agatha's nerves humming. Whoever had stolen the letter had done so without leaving much trace, only that fleck of blue dye. She rose and paced across the living room. Letitia handled that dye, so did Maurice, and Colin. But why would any of them come to my cottage, or return the letter, or remove it in the first place? The kettle clicked on. Agatha hadn't touched it. She must have brushed the switch. Still, the little mechanical hiss steadied her. She made a cup of tea and sat again, feeling the warmth curl through her irritation. Her eye drifted across the room to the stack of bridal magazines she'd gathered while researching motives. Most depicted beaming couples holding cakes the size of small houses. Agatha snorted. Marriage seemed as treacherous as poison, but at least poison required only one participant. The tea soothed her enough for clarity. Someone had framed her once, tried to intimidate her twice, and stolen evidence from her home. That meant she was on the right path. She stood, determination returning like a spark to dry kindling. "Tomorrow," she announced to Hodge. "I visit Letitia again, and this time I'm getting answers." Hodge yawned. "Yes," Agatha said dryly. "I know. You're unimpressed. But someone in this village is playing games, and I intend to end them." She tightened the curtains, checked her door twice, and prepared for another restless night, the kind of night that always preceded her sharpest deductions. Carsely, quiet under a thin moonlight, seemed peaceful, but Agatha knew better. Peace in this village never lasted long. The next day dawned with a thin, lemon-coloured light that made Carsely look freshly ironed. The breeze was mild, the air smelt faintly of wet bark, and the whole village seemed poised between spring cheer and quiet suspicion. Agatha Raisin, however, felt neither cheerful nor quiet. She marched toward Morton-in-Marsh with the stride of a woman who had run out of patience and refused to restock it. Roy Silver trotted beside her, already rehearsing lines for an imaginary documentary. "Chapter 6, he intoned dramatically. The glamorous detective and her loyal sidekick approached their next suspect. "You're not my sidekick," Agatha said. "You're decorative background noise." "Then I'm doing marvellously," Roy replied, entirely unoffended. They reached the small tea shop where Jocelyn Vane had asked to meet. Sunlight filtered softly across the tables, casting gentle patterns on the pale wood. The air carried the scent of cinnamon and warm sugar, the kind of smell that made women feel charitable and men feel guilty. Jocelyn sat alone by the window, hands tight around a teacup. She looked elegant even in distress, a slim figure, neat chignon, and a face composed with exhausting effort. As Agatha and Roy approached, Jocelyn gave a small, brittle smile. "Thank you for coming," she said softly. Agatha sat opposite her. "You asked for this meeting. What's happened?" Jocelyn hesitated, glancing around as though the floral wallpaper might eavesdrop. "Maurice was blackmailing me." Roy's eyes lit up. "Ooh, sordid." Agatha shot him a look. "Go on, Jocelyn." The young woman exhaled shakily. "Years ago I worked under a different name, a messy family matter. I chose to leave and start fresh. Maurice found out and threatened to expose me to clients and the committee. He said it would restore honesty to the business." "Meaning it would ruin you," Agatha said. Jocelyn nodded, her voice trembling. "I hated him for it. I was frightened, not murderous. But," she swallowed, "I did see someone near Letitia Hardwick's cottage the night before the showcase. It wasn't Letitia." Agatha leaned forward. "Who?" "Eloise Carter's fiancé, Andrew." Agatha blinked. "Andrew? The man with the personality of wet cardboard?" "He was carrying something," Jocelyn whispered. "A small box. He looked nervous. When he saw me, he pretended to adjust his tie and walk the other way." Roy gasped. "Aggie, this is better than telly." Agatha ignored him. "Did you tell Bill?" "I didn't know what to say," Jocelyn said miserably. "And I didn't want Maurice's threats to come out." Agatha reached across the table, surprising herself. "You did the right thing. Or the second right thing. The first right thing would have been telling me sooner." Jocelyn managed a faint smile, then dabbed her eyes. "I should go. Please, don't use my name unless you must." She left quickly, shoulders tight. Agatha watched her go, her own mind ticking through possibilities. Maurice blackmailing her explained fear, but not murder. It was Andrew she meant to examine next. Roy flipped open his notebook. "Darling, I'm ready." "You don't need a notebook," Agatha muttered. "Detectives always have notebooks." "You're not a detective." "Neither are you, technically." She glared at him. He fluttered his lashes. They set off toward the Carter's cottage. The walk back to Carsely was lined with hedgerows bursting into fresh green. Birds spiraled in the clear sky, and the earlier chill had warmed into a gentle mid-morning glow. Agatha scarcely noticed. Her mind replayed Jocelyn's words. Andrew at Letitia's. A box, a nervous face, a slammed cupboard the next day. She stopped outside the Carter cottage and knocked sharply. Eloise answered with the frightened expression of someone who has lived with conflict for too long. "Agatha," she whispered. "Andrew's home." "Good," Agatha said. "We need to talk." Andrew appeared behind Eloise, posture stiff. "This again?" "Yes," Agatha replied. "Did you go to Letitia Hardwick's garden the night before the showcase?" Eloise's breath caught. Andrew's jaw tightened. "I told you before I went nowhere near her." Agatha leaned closer. "Jocelyn Vane saw you." Eloise went pale. Andrew's eyes flashed with something between fear and anger. "All right," he said through clenched teeth. "I went to return a cake stand, that's all." "At night?" Agatha asked. "Yes," he replied stubbornly. "We were busy during the day." Eloise's fingers trembled at her side, though she tried to hide it. Agatha noticed and softened her tone. "Eloise, dear, are you all right?" "I'm fine," Eloise said quickly. Roy murmured, "She lies worse than Letitia." Agatha pushed further. "Maurice criticized your cake and upset you. Andrew, did he threaten you?" Andrew hesitated. Eloise's eyes filled with tears. Finally Eloise spoke, voice shaking. "Maurice told me Andrew sabotaged my original cake design. He said Andrew wanted me dependent on him. Maurice said he would tell everyone." Agatha felt her irritation shift to something colder. Andrew grabbed Eloise's arm. "He was exaggerating," he said. "I didn't sabotage anything." "Then why were you in Letitia's garden?" Agatha demanded. "I told you," he snapped, returning a stand. Agatha's gaze dropped to Eloise's wrist. A faint bruise peeked from under her sleeve. Eloise saw where Agatha's eyes lingered and pulled her arm away, flushing. "It's nothing." Agatha clenched her teeth. Domestic tensions were not her speciality, but she recognized fear when she saw it. Andrew seemed controlling, angry, yes, but not meticulous enough for the carefully orchestrated poisonings. "We're leaving," he said, and slammed the door. Roy exhaled once they'd gone. "Well, he's a gloomy bouquet." "He's hiding something," Agatha muttered, "but not murder. His rage is messy. These killings aren't." They walked back into the village. The sunlight had settled into a pleasant warmth, brightening every patch of stone. Carsely almost looked innocent again. "So," Roy said lightly, "who else is left? The baker, the butcher, Doris Simpson? I'd watch Doris. Anyone who defends the raffle table with that much fervour is capable of great violence." Agatha didn't laugh. "Jocelyn is intelligent, disciplined, a woman under pressure, and she has access to everything Maurice handled." Roy clutched his scarf. "A graceful murderer. Deliciously tragic." Agatha ignored his theatrics. Her thoughts shifted back to the missing letter. Someone had stolen it from her cottage yesterday and returned it later. Crumpled. Why? To edit it? Remove evidence? Or simply to scare her? As they approached her garden gate, something white fluttered against the lower hinge. Agatha bent to pick it up. A tiny scrap of paper, just a torn corner of her missing letter. Whoever had taken it hadn't been careful putting it back. She turned it over. On the back, faint smears of the same metallic blue food dye she had found on her doormat. Roy leaned in eagerly. Aggie. Could be Letitia again. Or someone framing Letitia, Agatha said. Or someone using her materials. The possibilities tangled like ribbon threads in her mind. Inside the cottage, the hallway felt too quiet again. Hodge lounged on the stairs, unimpressed. Agatha stroked his head absently. "Someone is playing a long game, Hodge," she murmured, "and I don't intend to lose." Roy posed dramatically by the doorway. "Then what's our next move?" Agatha straightened. "We talk to Jocelyn again. Properly. She's hiding something more." Roy nodded solemnly, though the effect was ruined by the glitter on his scarf. "Lead the way, detective." Agatha caught her own reflection in the hall mirror. Hair slightly wind-tossed, jacket creased, expression fierce. Not glamorous, not elegant, but determined. "Tomorrow," she said softly. "Tomorrow I get answers." She tapped ash from an unlit cigarette, realizing she'd lifted it without lighting it. Her second irony of the day. Hodge yawned in approval. Carsely woke to a cloudless, startlingly blue morning, the sort that made the village look innocent and scrubbed, as though no one had ever harboured a secret or held a grudge. Agatha Raisin, however, felt none of the day's optimism. She stood on her doorstep, jacket half-buttoned, staring at the police car parked by the vicarage. Something was wrong. something new. She hurried down the lane, heart thudding, and found Bill Wong standing by the vicarage gate. His expression, usually soft, was taut. "Bill," Agatha demanded, "what's happened?" Bill exhaled. "Colin Gresley collapsed here this morning, delivering flowers." Agatha blinked. "Collapsed?" Bill nodded grimly. "Same symptoms as Maurice, it's poison." The sunlight felt suddenly too bright, too sharp. Agatha steadied herself on the fence. "Colin? But he wouldn't hurt anyone. He panics if a customer raises their voice." "Someone hurt him," Bill said, "and we don't yet know why." Agatha's mind rushed. Colin, anxious, harmless Colin, had been part of the tangle of dies and invoices. He'd spoken to her only yesterday. Not confident, not clever, but certainly not dangerous. Now he was dead because someone wanted loose ends tied. Mrs. Bloxby appeared in the vicarage doorway, hands clasped, face pale. "Poor man," she murmured. "He'd just dropped off a bouquet. I stepped out a moment later and found him on the path." Agatha squeezed the vicar's wife's hand gently. "You did the right thing calling Bill." Bill closed his notebook. "Agatha, please, don't interfere. This is escalating." "Escalating is why I have to interfere," she replied. "Someone is trying to tidy up the crime scene, and murderers tidying is never good news." Bill sighed. "Just be careful." "I'm always careful," she lied. She walked away slowly, the village stretching before her in clean morning light that now felt dishonest. Colin Gresley, dead, poisoned. Someone had silenced a man too timid to fight back. Agatha reached her cottage but didn't go inside. She needed to understand the pattern, and sitting still was beyond her patience. Instead, she headed straight for Lavender Rise. Letitia Hardwick opened her cottage door just far enough for her face to appear. She looked exhausted, defensive, and suspiciously clean, the kind of cleanliness forged by panic. "What now, Agatha?" she asked. "Colin Gresley is dead," Agatha said simply. Letitia paled. "Colin? No, but he was here yesterday. He returned the dye samples, I swear." Agatha stepped forward. "Letitia, someone poisoned him. Someone with access to decorative ingredients and a motive to silence anyone who asked questions." Letitia clutched her apron. "You think I—" "No," Agatha said. "I think you're hiding something, but not murder." Letitia sagged with relief, then stiffened again. "I wasn't hiding a killer, honestly. That cupboard you heard yesterday." Agatha raised a hand. "Letitia, you have two choices. Tell me the truth, or wait until Bill comes back with more questions." Letitia twisted the hem of her apron. "All right. I had my nephew staying. He'd arrived unexpectedly the night before the showcase. He wasn't supposed to be in the kitchen. He panicked when you knocked." Agatha blinked. "A nephew?" "Yes. Timothy, useless boy. Sleeps till noon, eats constantly, breaks things. I didn't want him mentioned because people talk. They'd say he ruined my cake, and he probably did." Agatha considered her carefully. It was a reasonable explanation, too reasonable to be invented quickly, and nothing about Letitia suggested she had the patience required for subtle poisonings. "All right," Agatha said, "but don't make me chase you again." She left before Letitia could reply. The sun warmed the lane, though Agatha felt none of it. Her mind churned. Colin's death mattered. Someone was moving pieces on a board she couldn't fully see. She needed the kind of clarity only Mrs. Bloxby could give. At the vicarage, Mrs. Bloxby ushered her inside with gentle efficiency. The sitting room smelled of freshly baked scones, though Agatha's appetite had vanished. "Poor Colin," Mrs. Bloxby murmured, placing a cup of tea in Agatha's hands. "I keep thinking of the lilies he was carrying. They scattered everywhere." "He knew something," Agatha said, "or saw something." Mrs. Bloxby nodded thoughtfully. "He and Maurice argued last week about payment, but I also heard Maurice accuse him of ruining everything for someone else." Agatha frowned. "Someone else?" "Yes. Another person Maurice said had secrets." Agatha felt the thread tug. Maurice had been blackmailing Jocelyn. He had criticised Eloise. He had owed money to Colin. And now two of them were dead. "It's connected," she said. "Maurice threatened someone's future, someone's reputation, and now anyone who might reveal the truth is being removed." Mrs. Bloxby placed a warm hand on hers. "Agatha, please be cautious." "I'm sick of being cautious," she said. "Caution hasn't stopped anyone from dying." She stood abruptly and marched back outside into the crisp light. Somewhere in this village someone was terrified, terrified enough to poison once, then again. Agatha felt the weight of it in her ribs. She walked without thinking, letting her instincts lead her. Past the green, past the shop, past the cottage with the twitching curtains that she had noticed yesterday. She followed her feet until they took her somewhere unexpected. Jocelyn Vane's flat. The door was slightly ajar. Agatha knocked. "Jocelyn?" No answer. She pushed gently. The flat was tidy, elegant, tasteful, the opposite of its owner's current emotional state. A vase of flowers sat on the table. Fresh, delivered this morning. Agatha's stomach tightened. A police note lay on the counter. "We need to talk. Please contact us immediately." D.S. Wong. Agatha stepped back into the hall, pulse racing. Bill had come here, and Jocelyn wasn't home, or wasn't answering. She walked quickly away, thoughts spiraling. Jocelyn had secrets, but she didn't strike Agatha as a killer. Yet something was undeniably wrong. As Agatha crossed the green again, the church bells began to chime the hour, their clear notes cutting through the quiet village air. Somewhere in the distance a dog barked, a tractor hummed along a field. Life in Carsely continued, indifferent to poisons and secrets. Agatha stopped by a bench beneath an old oak. She needed to think. She needed to arrange facts like flowers in one of Colin's neat bouquets. Fact: Maurice had been poisoned by a rare decorative ingredient. Fact: Colin had access to those ingredients but lacked motive to kill himself. Fact: Colin had returned dye samples, including Prussian blue, to Letitia. Fact: someone broke into Agatha's cottage to steal and later return the threatening letter. Fact: Jocelyn was afraid of exposure. Eloise was terrified of Andrew, and Andrew had lied. But only one person had been calmly, quietly present at every scene: Jocelyn Vane. Agatha's breath caught. Jocelyn had been there when Letitia panicked. Jocelyn had been there when Maurice argued. Jocelyn had access to ingredients, samples, schedules, and opportunities. Yet Agatha hesitated. Something about blaming Jocelyn felt too easy, like choosing the most graceful vase simply because it didn't clash with the decor. Still, she needed answers. She stood. The sun had dipped slightly, turning the edges of the village gold. A warm breeze stirred the branches overhead. "Time to stop letting the murderer lead," she murmured. "Time to pull the thread deliberately." She walked home, stride firm, jaw set. Inside, Hodge lounged on the windowsill, stretching luxuriously. His tail flicked as she entered, unimpressed with her turmoil. Agatha stroked his head absently. "Colin didn't deserve that," she said softly. "And whoever did it is running scared. That means they'll make a mistake soon." Hodge blinked once, as if unimpressed with her deduction. Agatha managed a small, grim smile. "Fine. I'll find the mistake myself." Outside, Carsely glowed in warm afternoon light. But beneath the idyllic surface, something cold and calculated still moved among them. The next morning arrived with a bold, confident sunshine, the sort that pretended everything in Carsely was perfectly ordinary. Birds chattered cheerfully from hedges, the green looked almost smug, and the village shop displayed its fruit as though murder had never touched the parish. Agatha Raisin strode past it all with a face that promised someone would be interrogated before Elevenses. Roy Silver hurried along beside her, scarf fluttering like a wounded flag. "Aggie, darling, please slow down. I'm not wearing sensible shoes." "Then wear sensible shoes," Agatha snapped. "But these are Italian." "Then suffer," Roy sighed dramatically. "You're in a mood." "I'm in a village where people keep dying," she replied. "It tends to encourage moods." They turned onto Beach Lane, the Carter's cottage sitting primly behind a low hedge. Eloise's flowers were blooming timidly, pale pinks and creams, as though afraid their colours might attract criticism. Agatha marched up the path and knocked sharply. Andrew opened the door. His expression curdled instantly. "You again?" "Yes, me again," Agatha said, pushing past him before he could object. "We need to talk." Eloise stood in the sitting room, hands clasped tightly, eyes already fearful. Agatha softened slightly at the sight. "Eloise, dear, we're not here to upset you, but something isn't right." Andrew shut the door. "I've told you everything." "You've told me nothing useful," Agatha said. "Let's start again." She gestured for Eloise to sit. Eloise obeyed, trembling. Andrew remained standing, jaw locked. Jocelyn Vane saw you near Letitia Hardwick's cottage the night before the showcase, Agatha said to Andrew, carrying a box. Eloise gasped. Andrew's nostrils flared. I was returning a cake stand. At night? Agatha asked. Without telling your fiancé. I don't need permission to run errands, he snapped. Agatha's voice cooled. You didn't mention the box until confronted. That's suspicious. Eloise tugged at her sleeve, revealing the faint bruise on her wrist again. Andrew noticed Agatha noticing and moved closer, blocking her view. You're reading things into nothing. Roy stepped forward. Darling, the only thing you're blocking is the sunlight. Agatha continued. Were you in Letitia's kitchen? No, Andrew snapped. I stayed outside. Yet Jocelyn saw you near the back door, Agatha said, eyes darting, nervous, hardly the attitude of a man returning crockery. Eloise's lower lip quivered. Andrew, why didn't you tell me? Andrew spun toward her. Because Maurice was filling your head with rubbish. He said I sabotaged your cake order. Lies. He wanted to turn you against me. Agatha stepped between them. Why would Maurice lie? Andrew didn't answer. His silence, tight and furious, spoke volumes. Andrew, Agatha said, did you threaten Maurice? Of course not, he barked. I confronted him once, that's all. He humiliated Eloise at the showcase rehearsal. Anyone would have said something. Did he threaten you back? Agatha pressed. Andrew hesitated, just long enough for the room to shift. Eloise whispered, He said Andrew was controlling me. He said he'd make everything public. Agatha's brow knit. Public how? That Andrew checks my calls, Eloise said tearfully. That he doesn't like me visiting friends. That he interfered with my cake order when I wanted something simple. Andrew's voice dropped dangerously. Eloise. She shrank slightly. Agatha stepped closer to her. Eloise, dear, did you ever consider that Maurice may have been trying to warn you? Warn her? Andrew laughed sharply. Maurice enjoyed poking at people's weaknesses. He wanted chaos. He wasn't some guardian angel. Agatha studied him. Rage, insecurity, possessiveness, all present. But planning? Precision? No. Andrew was too reactive. Poisoning required a cool hand, not a clenched fist. Fine, Agatha said. Let's assume you're innocent of murder. Why lie about being at Letitia's? I wasn't lying, he said, though his voice cracked. Eloise clutched her hands tighter. Andrew, did you really sabotage my cake? It was too expensive, he muttered. We don't need some huge, ridiculous thing. Weddings are already extravagant. You changed my order without asking, she whispered. Agatha watched their dynamic with growing discomfort. Eloise's fear was too real, too familiar to dismiss. Andrew's possessiveness might not make him a killer, but it certainly made him dangerous in other ways. She stepped back. We're leaving, she said firmly. Eloise, if you need help, the vicarage is always open to you. Andrew bristled. Mind your own business. Murder is my business, Agatha said, marching out. Roy followed, muttering, Honestly, Aggie, that man embodies the tragedy of beige. Outside, the sunlight had grown brighter, almost cheerful. Agatha found herself resenting it. He's not the killer, she said. He lacks the finesse. And the organizational skills, Roy added. Agatha ignored him. Her mind churned. Andrew visiting Letitia's garden was odd, but not damning. His control issues made him unpleasant, not methodical, and both murders had been planned carefully, executed with precision. Jocelyn, Agatha murmured. Roy perked up. Elegant, poised, twitchy? Yes, she's suspicious. Not twitchy, Agatha said. Disciplined, afraid, intelligent enough to orchestrate things. Roy leaned close. Darling, if she's guilty, she's the chicest murderer in the Cotswolds. Agatha considered the facts as they reached the green. Families strolled, dogs barked, the vicar's bicycle squeaked past, all the normal rhythms of Carsely, mocking her frustration. They walked toward Agatha's cottage. The sun warmed the ivy on her walls, and a mild breeze stirred the curtains through her open top window. For a moment, everything looked deceptively peaceful. Then Roy shouted, Aggie, look! A folded sheet lay on the doorstep. Agatha bent, picked it up, and felt her stomach tighten. It was the missing threat letter, the original, now creased and missing one neat corner, as though hastily mishandled. "Someone put it back," she whispered. Roy gasped. "Returned evidence? How retro." Agatha turned the paper over. More faint traces of that metallic blue dye marked the edges. "Letitia's dye again," she said, "but this time it's smeared differently. Someone handled it with unsteady fingers." Roy peered over her shoulder. "So the thief panicked." "Or rushed," Agatha murmured. She carried the letter inside and set it on the table. Hodge was curled in her armchair, tail flicking lazily. Agatha stroked his head twice before pacing the room. "Colin knew something," she said aloud. "And now he's dead. Someone interfered with Letitia's cake. Someone stole and returned this letter. Someone moved through my cottage twice, unafraid but hurried." "A very confident murderer," Roy said. "A murderer who blends in," Agatha corrected. "Someone unobtrusive. Someone trusted." Roy's scarf fluttered dramatically as he turned. "Aggie, are we thinking the same person?" "Yes," she said slowly. "Jocelyn Vane." The name settled in the room like a dropped pin. "She had access to Maurice's materials," Agatha said. "She was at the showcase early. She knew where Letitia's ingredients were kept. She saw Andrew, but perhaps because she was there too, for her own reasons." Roy widened his eyes. "And she's petite enough to move quietly. A silent assassin in sensible heels." Agatha ignored the melodrama. "And she's been frightened. But what if it's guilt disguised as fear?" Roy nodded eagerly. "Shall we confront her?" "Not yet," Agatha said. "She'll shut down if cornered. I need to understand the motive completely." She sat at the table, hands clasped, staring at the crumpled letter. Hodge stretched luxuriously, unconcerned. The sunlight fell across her shoulders, warm despite the chill running through her thoughts. "Someone is close to breaking," she murmured. "And the next crack will tell me everything." Outside, Carsely buzzed quietly with its usual life. Washing on lines, clattering teacups, gossip forming like morning mist. Agatha breathed in, steadying herself. "Tomorrow," she said. "Tomorrow we stop playing catch-up." Hodge blinked at her with mild disdain, as though doubting she'd manage it. Agatha smirked faintly. "Watch me." Carsely woke under a thin grey sky, the sort that looked undecided. Not quite drizzle, not quite promise. A faint chill clung to the hedgerows, and the village green sat in a quiet sulk, as though brooding over too many secrets. Agatha Raisin stepped outside her cottage with her jaw set and her handbag swinging like a weapon. Today, she intended to pull the truth out of hiding by its hair. Roy Silver stood waiting by the gate, bundled in an oversized coat that looked theatrical even at a distance. "Aggie, I barely slept," he announced. "All night I dreamt of elegant murderesses." "Let's hope we're not about to meet one," Agatha said. "Come on. Bill wants us at Jocelyn's flat." They walked briskly through Carsely, the air cool and faintly metallic. A church bell clanged somewhere behind them, the sound echoing off the stone cottages like a punctuation mark. Today felt like a day for endings, the neat, brutal kind. Bill Wong waited outside Jocelyn Vane's flat, hands tucked into his pockets. His expression was grave enough to confirm Agatha's suspicions. "We have a warrant," he said quietly. "Jocelyn didn't show up to speak with us yesterday. Something's off." "Everything's off," Agatha said. "Every leaf in this village is off." Bill raised an eyebrow. "Let's keep it calm, please." He pushed the door open. The flat looked as it had the day before. Tidy, tasteful, elegant. Too elegant, too thoughtful. A woman who curated her space this carefully did nothing by accident. Bill began checking drawers. Roy flitted around the room, narrating quietly as though filming a documentary. Agatha ignored both of them and followed her instinct, walking straight to the small writing desk tucked beneath the window. A locked drawer. "Bill," she said, tapping it. Bill knelt, pulled a small tool from his kit, and worked the lock. It clicked open. Agatha exhaled slowly. Inside lay a tin of decorative dye powders, the same ranges used by professional bakers. Blues, pinks, golds, silvers. A neat notebook sat beside them, filled with Maurice Pendlebury's schedules, cake orders, sample dates, tasting notes, and tucked between the pages envelopes, threat letters, drafts, the same elegant script used on the note someone had delivered to Agatha. "Well," Roy whispered, "this is very on brand for a glamorous villain." Bill turned to Agatha, His voice was soft but heavy. "This is enough to bring her in." Agatha swallowed. "Let's keep looking." In a second drawer, they found an opened bill for a specialty ingredient supplier in Oxford, one that sold rare decorative compounds, including the exact toxin used in both murders. Jocelyn had ordered samples 6 weeks earlier. Agatha felt the cold coil inside her chest tighten. She sat on the edge of the desk, staring at the evidence as though trying to rearrange it into something kinder. "Maurice discovered her former name," Agatha murmured. She thought he'd expose her, but he also threatened her job, her future. And Colin must have seen her returning something to Letitia's bin. "Saw too much," Bill said, and confronted her. Roy wrapped his scarf around his neck. "Elegant women can be terrifying." Agatha didn't smile. "We need to find her." She stood, pacing the room. Everything felt wrong. The soft decor, the polished surfaces, the gentle colours, all of it hiding something sharp beneath. "She's clever," Agatha said. "Clever enough to frame Letitia. Clever enough to steal the threatening letter from my house and return it later. She wanted to redirect suspicion." Bill nodded. "And clever enough to know you were investigating." A faint click sounded from down the hallway. They all froze. Agatha moved first, stepping softly toward the kitchen. The door was ajar. A shadow shifted behind it. Then Jocelyn stepped out. She looked pale, composed, and completely defeated. Her hair was neatly pinned, her blouse buttoned, as though she had dressed deliberately for this moment. There was no attempt to run. "I knew you'd come," she said quietly. Bill stepped forward. "Jocelyn Vane, I'm placing you." "Wait," she said gently, lifting a hand. "Let me speak first." Agatha's heart tugged against her ribs. She hadn't expected Jocelyn to appear calm. She hadn't expected her to surrender. It unsettled her more than any drama could have. Jocelyn turned to Agatha. "You're very good at this. Far better than I realized. You see people." Agatha blinked. "I see them because I am them," she muttered. Jocelyn offered a sad smile. "Maurice threatened me. He said he'd expose my real name to clients. I'd spent years rebuilding myself. I couldn't go back to who I was. You don't know what it's like to feel your future slipping away." Agatha's jaw clenched. "More than you think." Jocelyn continued. "He wanted to teach me a lesson. To humble me," he said. "He wasn't malicious, just cruel in that careless way some men are." Agatha nodded. She understood that kind of cruelty too well. "I didn't mean to kill him," Jocelyn said. "I only meant to make him ill. A bad stomach upset. Something humiliating, not fatal. I misjudged the strength. I thought such a tiny amount would only make him sick. I added a tiny amount of that compound to one of the decorative samples, but he tasted it outright. More than I expected. He swallowed too much." Her voice cracked. "He collapsed before I could do anything." Bill stepped closer. "And Colin?" Jocelyn closed her eyes. "He confronted me. He'd seen me near Letitia's kitchen bin the night of the showcase, putting back the tampered sample. He said he'd tell Maurice and the police, and I panicked. I didn't plan his death. I didn't think. I just reacted." Roy's hand went to his mouth. Agatha looked at her for a long moment. Jocelyn didn't look like a murderer. She looked like a tired woman who had run out of places to hide. "Jocelyn," Agatha said softly, "why return the letter to my house?" "I didn't want you blamed," Jocelyn whispered. "You were never meant to be part of this." Agatha blinked. "People rarely intend to involve me in their disasters." Her voice softened. "Jocelyn, you should come with Bill now, quietly." Jocelyn nodded. No resistance, no tears, just a deep, exhausted acceptance. Bill guided her out gently. "You have the right to—" "I know," she said. "I'll come peacefully." She glanced back at Agatha once, a fragile, wordless apology. Then she stepped outside. Agatha stood in the flat long after they'd gone. The silence pressed around her, weighted with sadness rather than danger. She sat heavily in a chair, staring at the delicate flowers on Jocelyn's table. Lilies, roses, perfectly arranged. Beauty hiding pain. The story of Jocelyn's life. Roy approached quietly. "Aggie, are you all right?" Agatha exhaled. "I will be." But there was a hollow space inside her. Not triumph, not satisfaction, just the knowledge that the truth was often sadder than the lies that hid it. She left the flat and walked back into Carsely with slow, steady steps. The day had warmed. Birds sang again. Somewhere someone laughed. Life in the Cotswolds continued, unaware of how fragile it could be. She reached her cottage and found Hodge waiting on the windowsill, tail flicking with bored impatience. She stroked him once, gently, and he nuzzled her hand in rare affection. "Yes," she murmured, "I solved it, but it doesn't feel like winning." Hodge stretched luxuriously, unconcerned. Agatha allowed herself a tired smile. At least someone in this house remains consistent. Outside, Carsely glowed quietly in the afternoon light. Agatha breathed out, long, slow, readying herself for whatever came next. The next morning broke in a warm, peach-coloured glow, the kind of gentle Cotswold sunrise that tried its best to convince the world it had never heard of murder. Agatha Raisin stood at her bedroom window, staring down at Carsely with a complicated mixture of pride, fatigue, and faint annoyance. Her name had been mostly cleared, her deductions vindicated, and yet her victory felt suspiciously like a hollow men's shoe, nicely polished on the outside, empty within. Hodge, sprawled insolently across her pillow, stretched and pawed at her hair. Agatha pushed him off with mild indignation. "You could show some respect," she muttered. "Not every woman solves 2 murders in a week." Hodge blinked, unimpressed. She dressed in a crisp navy jacket that she hoped conveyed authority without tipping into desperation. Today was the postponed wedding showcase, and the entire village would be in attendance. After everything, Agatha refused to skulk at home like a criminal avoiding daylight. No, she would walk into that hall head held high, even if half the village now stared at her as though she were an ingredient in a dangerous recipe. Outside, Carsely buzzed with purposeful cheer. The air was soft and warm, as though spring had decided to behave. Birds trilled from the hedges, and the village green bustled with people carrying trays, ribbons, and last-minute decorations. Agatha strode across it, chin lifted, careful not to catch her heel in the grass. At the W.I. Hall door stood Doris Simpson, clipboard in hand and eyes bright with the kind of authority that came only from years of unofficial village governance. "Morning, Agatha," Doris chirped. "Glad to see you up and about. You must be relieved your cake wasn't the lethal one." "Doris," Agatha said sweetly, "if you'd repeated that with the slightest doubt in your voice, I'd have turned your clipboard sideways and—" "Right. Well, lovely day for a showcase," Doris squeaked and scurried off. Agatha smirked. Small victories counted. Inside, the hall glowed with warm sunlight filtering through the high windows. Brides-to-be milled about, vendors rearranged displays, and the room hummed with optimistic chatter. Despite everything, Carsely managed to look cheerful again, as though determined to paper over scandal with bunting. Letitia Hardwick approached, posture stiff, eyes wary. "Agatha," she said. Agatha braced herself for blame or accusation. Instead, Letitia cleared her throat. "I suppose I should thank you." Agatha blinked. "Thank me?" "For clearing my name," Letitia said uncomfortably. "The village would have had me baking repentance cakes for the next decade if Jocelyn hadn't been caught." Agatha softened slightly. "Letitia, you may be competitive to the point of madness, but I never believed you were a murderer." Letitia sniffed. "Well, good," she paused. "By the way, I heard someone suggest we nominate you to judge the cake competition this afternoon." Agatha froze. "Judge it?" "Yes," Letitia said. "You solved the case. Now you must preside over the sweets." Agatha stared at her. "I didn't solve the case in order to eat badly iced Battenberg." Letitia shrugged. "Tradition is tradition." Before Agatha could protest further, Bill Wong walked up. He looked unusually relaxed, a sure sign his paperwork was nearly done. "Morning, Agatha. Thought I'd check you were surviving Carsley's newfound enthusiasm." "I've been nominated to judge cakes," she said darkly. Bill laughed. "Consider it the village's way of reintegrating you." "Reintegration would be simpler without sugar icing." He smiled, then lowered his voice. "Thank you, Agatha. Genuinely. We couldn't have solved this without you." Agatha felt a small, suspicious warmth in her chest. Compliments always made her uncomfortable. "Oh, nonsense," she said briskly. "I simply connect dots. You do the real work." "Not always," Bill said quietly. Before sentiment could escalate, a fate Agatha considered worse than judgment by sponge cake, Roy Silver swept into the hall in a flamboyant swirl of fragrance and scarves. "Aggie, the village looks radiant, and so do you. You're glowing with triumph." "I'm glowing with exhaustion," Agatha muttered. "And you're glowing because you've applied too much highlighter again." Roy ignored the insult and clasped her arm. "You must give a speech today, a speech on the importance of community baking." Agatha recoiled. "Absolutely not." Roy's grin widened. "Doris says you must." "Doris can bite me." "Oh, she will," with enthusiasm, Roy said. Before Agatha could reply, the hall lights dimmed slightly as someone adjusted a decoration. The chatter built, and people began gathering for opening announcements. Mrs. Blocksby glided over, serene as ever. "Agatha," she said warmly, "you look well." "A lie," Agatha replied, "but a comforting one." Mrs. Blocksby chuckled. "It is good to have you here today. Everyone feels safer now that things are resolved." "Resolved," Agatha repeated. "Yes, though I'll tell you something, Mrs. Blocksby. I don't like how much my reputation relies on murder cases." The vicar's wife smiled gently. "Sometimes, Agatha, people simply admire bravery." Agatha pretended not to be touched. A bell chimed near the stage. Doris climbed onto the platform, beaming with the pleasure of someone about to inflict organization on others. "Welcome, everyone. Before we begin, I'm delighted to announce that today's cake judge will be our very own Agatha Raisin." The hall erupted into claps, cheers, and a few nervous titters. Agatha froze. Roy pushed her forward like a proud mother shoving a reluctant child onto a school stage. "Go on, Aggie. Shine." She climbed the small steps and stood beside Doris, who thrust a microphone into her hands. "Say a few words about baking," Doris whispered. Agatha glared at her. Doris smiled sweetly. Trapped, Agatha cleared her throat. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began stiffly, "baking is an important part of village life." Bill Wong covered his smile with his hand. Roy fanned himself proudly. Agatha continued. "It is a way of expressing, affection, community, and occasionally unhealthy levels of competition." A ripple of laughter broke the tension. "And," she added with a firm nod, "I am honoured to judge your cakes today, especially because mine nearly ended up as a crime scene prop." More laughter. Even Letitia cracked a reluctant smile. Agatha stepped back, eager to escape the stage. As she did, her handbag squirmed. She froze. Oh no. From inside the bag, a ginger head popped out, Hodge, indignant and curious, having smuggled himself into public life yet again. He climbed halfway out, knocking over a tray of decorative petals on the judging table. Gasps and giggles filled the room. Agatha buried her face in her hands. "Perfect," she muttered. "My cat is now part of the program." Roy clapped delightedly. "He's a natural, Aggie," Bill murmured. "I think he's improving the event." Hodge prowled along the table in superior fashion, sniffing icing with disdain. Doris rushed forward, flustered. "Animals aren't allowed in the judging area." "Tell him that," Agatha said with a sigh. But something softened in the room, a moment of shared humour, a ripple of affection. Even the stiffest villagers smiled. Somehow the absurdity healed more tension than speeches ever could. As she scooped up the sulking Hodge and stepped off stage, Agatha felt a reluctant warmth settle in her chest. For all its nosiness and gossip, Carsely could be oddly forgiving. Mrs. Blocksby approached. "You did wonderfully." "I did terribly," Agatha corrected, "but thank you." The showcase bustled into full swing. Cakes glimmered under the light, brides compared swatches, and villagers ambled contentedly. Agatha lingered by the side, stroking Hodge's head as he complained softly. Roy nudged her. "Feeling triumphant yet?" "No," Agatha said, "but I feel better." "That's almost the same thing," Roy said. Agatha allowed herself a small, tired smile. Almost. Carsely settled into the soft amber hush of early evening, the sort of gentle, honeyed light that made the cottages glow as though carved from warm butter. The wedding showcase had finally emptied, the last ribbons packed away. The final crumbs brushed from trestle tables. Peace, real, satisfying peace, drifted through the village like the scent of warm scones. Agatha Raisin walked home across the green with Hodge tucked under one arm and a judging ribbon stuffed in her bag. Her feet ached, her jacket smelled faintly of icing, and her hair had taken on a rebellious life of its own. But there was something quietly triumphant in her stride. She had survived the gossip, the suspicion, the poisoned cakes, the interrogation squads, and, worst of all, the mandatory speech on community baking. The sky above Carsely was turning lavender at the edges. the first shy stars blinking through. A faint warmth still lingered in the air, the last sigh of a long spring day. She reached her cottage door and paused, surprised by a flicker of contentment. This house, with its slightly chipped paint and uneven tiles, felt different now, safer, almost companionable. She unlocked it and stepped inside. The familiar warmth of home washed over her. The faint smell of lavender cleaner from that morning, the muted clink of her neighbour's wind chimes through the open window, the quiet tick of the old clock on the mantelpiece, all of it steadied her in a way no victory speech could. She set Hodge down, and he trotted off immediately, tail held high, as though resuming control of his domain. Agatha watched him and let out a soft, unexpected laugh. "You caused chaos today," she said, "and everyone adored you for it. Typical." Hodge flicked an ear, unimpressed by praise. Agatha wandered into the kitchen. The counters gleamed in the fading light, and the kettle sat invitingly on the hob. She reached for a bottle of white wine instead, then hesitated. Tea felt right tonight, grounding, familiar. She filled the kettle, listening to its rising hum, the sound comforting in its ordinariness. When it clicked off, she poured the steaming water over a tea bag and carried the mug into the sitting room. She sank into her favourite armchair, the one Hodge usually commandeered, and stretched her aching legs. The quiet felt deep, not empty, but restful. Her gaze drifted to the window. From there she could see the faint glow of distant cottage lamps, small pockets of life warming the heart of the village. Someone laughed faintly down the lane. Someone else shut a door gently. Carsely's rhythms, nosy, foolish, affectionate, were returning. Agatha let out a long breath. She had solved the case. 2 people dead, 1 culprit in custody, and the village's natural order restored. But the victory tasted bittersweet. Jocelyn's quiet dignity lingered in her mind like a shadow. So did Colin's anxious smile. Not all triumphs felt triumphant. She wrapped her hands around her mug. "Justice," she murmured, "is rarely neat." Hodge leapt onto the sofa, curling into a regal coil. His fur gleamed softly in the lamplight. Agatha watched him for a moment, feeling that odd mix of affection and irritation only cats and difficult men manage to summon. "I suppose," she said, "that life goes on." The thought drifted through her with surprising warmth. Life did go on, in muddled, imperfect ways. Carsely would gossip, Bill would caution her, Charles would turn up with a bottle and a smirk, and Roy would announce some new grand plan that would exhaust her. But beneath all that chaos, there would always be moments like this: a quiet evening, a warm mug, a cat pretending not to care. She sipped her tea. Its heat settled her, softening the sharp edges of the day. A faint breeze pushed through the slightly open window, carrying the distant scent of cut grass and a hint of someone's baking. Probably Letitia, probably smug again, but even that felt comforting. Predictable rivals were easier to handle than unpredictable friends. Agatha leaned back. The exhaustion of the week wrapped around her like a thick blanket. She closed her eyes briefly, letting the calm seep in. Behind her eyelids, scenes flickered. Maurice's dramatic fall, Colin's gentle face, Jocelyn's confession, Eloise's trembling hands. Painful, poignant, tangled. Life rarely offered clean lines, but it offered second chances, and tea, and warm rooms after cold days. Agatha found herself grateful for all 3. She opened her eyes and stared at the ceiling with a crooked smile. "You know, Hodge," she said, "I don't want every spring to involve murder, just most of them." Hodge yawned loudly, the picture of feline indifference. "Right," Agatha sighed. "Point taken." She set her empty mug on the side table. A woman can't even confide in her own cat. A comfortable silence settled, the kind that felt earned. Outside, twilight deepened into early night, the village slipping gently into stillness. Agatha stood, stretched cautiously, and walked to the window. She rested her fingertips against the glass, feeling its coolness. Across the green, Mrs. Bloxby's cottage glowed softly, a steady beacon in Agatha's unpredictable life. The vicar's wife had left a message earlier, thanking her again for her help and inviting her to tea later in the week. Agatha smiled faintly. Some friendships made the world feel less sharp. She closed the curtains, shutting out the deepening night, and turned back toward her armchair. "Well, Hodge," she said, "that's that. Another case sorted. Hodge stretched, claws extended, and settled deeper into the cushions. Agatha reached for the packet of cigarettes on the table. She hesitated, only a moment, before lighting one. The flame glowed warmly, briefly illuminating her face. She drew in a single, thoughtful breath, letting the smoke curl upward. Not a habitual drag tonight. A punctuation mark. "Here's to a quiet week," she murmured. Even she didn't believe it. Hodge flicked his tail in agreement, or possibly disdain. Agatha smiled softly. Yes, yes, trouble always finds me." She tapped ash neatly into the tray, turned off the lamp, and let the peaceful murmur of Carsely cradle the quiet edges of her thoughts. Another mystery done, another evening earned, and somewhere in the shadows of the Cotswolds, another story was no doubt preparing itself. But that, she thought with a final wry smile, could wait until tomorrow.